All my days are warmer with you. Written by Just Thinking Drabbles. Read by Rashi. Snow was uncommon in Adrestia, but not unheard of, and every time it fell, Ferdinand found himself mesmerized by it, just as he was now, as he sat by the window in the living room and watched the flurries fall. He couldn't help but adore the endless white flakes as they fell from the sky, and think of the many happy times he had when he was younger. He had seen them during the war too, of course, when they had gone to visit Fargus, but that was during much more unpleasant times, and he hadn't gotten a chance to enjoy it as much. The snowflakes were beautiful and, though it was perhaps a bit dramatic to say, he imagined them as little fragments of falling stars descending through the air. He loved them most, though, when they caught in the strands of black wavy hair, as they had done earlier when he and his husband Hubert had gone for a walk. Despite the weather being a bit colder than either of them were used to, he was glad that he successfully convinced him to come along and admire the snow with him. Hubert was not one for extreme weather, but if it was for the man he loved, then he didn't seem to mind too much. As for Ferdinand, he didn't mind the cold air, and he loved the way the snow made everything look magical. It almost appeared like a scene from a storybook, and the way it covered everything like a thick, fluffy blanket. Ferdinand stuck out his tongue to catch some of the flakes, and received a perplexed glance from Hubert, but it wasn't long before he was able to rope him into doing the same. They laughed afterward, and Ferdinand stepped closer, brushing aside a strand of his husband's hair, and kissing the tip of his nose, which had gone red from the cold. His cheeks, though already crimson as well, flushed an even deeper shade when receiving the affection. It was not often that the two of them got to spend so much time together, and that almost made everything feel more like a dream. Though Ferdinand knew logically that the snow wasn't for them, he still felt like, maybe, somehow, it was a gift. After all the winters where they were at war, and had to spend much of their time apart, he was glad they could finally enjoy peaceful days like this again, only this time together. Afterwards, they returned home to change into dry clothes and get warm. Once he had changed, Hubert went to the kitchen to brew them some coffee and tea, and Ferdinand took a seat by the window, where he was now, his eyes transfixed on the beautiful sight before him. Everything about this time of year was more lovely somehow, and he especially loved the activities like having a snowball fight or building snowmen that came with it. He was sure he could not handle this type of weather all the time, since he preferred being warm and the longer days that came with summer. But weather like this did give him an excuse to cuddle with Hubert, so he didn't mind it every now and then. When Ferdinand heard rustling behind him, he turned and found his husband placing a tray with their drinks onto a coffee table near the fireplace. He smiled to himself and slowly rose from his chair, grabbing a blanket which was hanging off the back, before approaching him. Hubert, ever the perceptive one, noticed him from the corner of his eyes and smiled at him as he extended the cup of southern fruit blend to him. He took the beverage and allowed the lovely, familiar scent to waft around him for a moment before taking a sip. Perfect as always. He made sure Hubert took a drink of his coffee and set it on the table again before he took his hand in his and pulled him onto the couch. He wrapped them both in the blanket and pulled Hubert into his arms as he pressed a kiss to the top of his head. The mage chuckled and looked at him, his green eyes fond. There was something else there too, an undeniable exhaustion that he could not hide no matter how hard he tried, and which made itself known by the bags beneath his eyes. Despite them, though, he looked relaxed, more so than he had in previous years, and for that Ferdinand was grateful. "I am glad I was able to spend so much time with you today, my love," he admitted, as he absently ran his fingers through Hubert's hair. His husband hummed in agreement. It is a rare treat indeed, to have a day off together." "Yes, one might speculate that it was even orchestrated by a certain imperial minister," "Perhaps it was," replied Hubert, with a knowing smirk. He took Ferdinand's hand in his and brought it to his lips, kissing each finger slowly, reverently, and the content sigh he heard from above was enough to make his heart skip a beat. They stayed like this for longer than either of them cared to keep track of, with Ferdinand's voice filling the room as he spoke about nothing in particular, and Hubert chiming in here and there and laughing in that way he only ever did when they were alone. Everything was warm and soft, and it all smelled of coffee and tea, and something so very Ferdinand that Hubert couldn't help but begin to drift asleep. Ferdinand noticed his eyes drooping, and his words becoming slurred with sleep, but he didn't mention it. Instead, he merely smiled to himself, and wrapped the blanket around them further. When he was sure Hubert could no longer make sense of what he was saying, he began to sing instead. It was a lovely melody, and one that seemed to soothe his husband even further. Before he knew it, light snoring filled the room, and mixed with the crackle of flames spitting sparks within the fireplace. Ferdinand looked towards the window again, and noticed the winter storm growing harder outside. It was true he didn't care much for the cold, but so long as he could have more days like this with Hubert, then he would always gladly welcome the snow.